and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Asuma Kataoka. We're breaking down the latest sanctions on Iran as the US and the European Union ramp up pressure on Tehran. These measures have far-reaching consequences for Iran, the region, and global politics. Let's dive deep into the details. The US has ramped up its sanctions on Iran, focusing on top officials after the deadly crackdown on anti-government protests. Among those sanctioned are Interior Minister Eskandar Momeni, responsible for overseeing the lethal law enforcement forces in Iran that has killed thousands of protesters. Also in the crosshairs, senior officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iranian investor Babak Morteza Zanjani, who is accused of embezzling billions from the Iranian people. For the first time, the U.S. Treasury has imposed sanctions on digital currency exchanges linked to Zanjani, exchanges that processed significant funds tied to the IRGC. This move aims to cut off Iran's access to global financial systems. The EU has also stepped up, designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization. They have imposed visa bans and asset freezes on Iranian officials and state entities. These sanctions target human rights violators and Tehran's military ties with Russia. It's clear the US and EU are sending a unified message. Iran must answer for its actions, both domestically and internationally. In response, Iran has retaliated, imposing its own sanctions on the EU. Tehran accuses the EU of interference in its internal affairs. This tit-for-tat exchange of sanctions has become a familiar pattern. Iran continues to resist pressure, using these sanctions as a rallying point to unite the country against the West. In a post on X, top Iranian security official Ali Larijani has wrote that under the resolution of Iran's Islamic Consultative Assembly, the armies of countries supporting the EU's move against the IRGC would be considered terrorist entities. The US and EU argue these sanctions are grounded in international law, backed by the September 2025 snapback and UN mandates. The EU's 2026 designation of the IRGC as a terrorist group provides legal authority for freezing assets and blocking trade. The US has also previously threatened secondary sanctions like a 25% tariff on nations trading with Iran, aiming to isolate Tehran. But there's an opposing view, the anti-legality perspective. Human rights groups argue these sanctions violate sovereignty, hurting civilians more than the government. Critics say they amount to collective punishment, which is illegal under international humanitarian law. But the suffering is not just political. The Iranian economy is already failing, and the regime is dealing with the aftermath of the nationwide protests that has resulted in the deaths of thousands. Now, in the final week of January 2026, Iran's economy has entered a state of accelerated freefall characterized by a catastrophic currency collapse and hyperinflation. The Iranian rial has plunged to a historic low of 1.5 million to the US dollar, while point-to-point inflation has surged to 60%, rendering basic staples like bread and meat unaffordable for the average household. So, do sanctions work? The results are mixed. While sanctions like those in 2012 to 2013 crippled Iran's economy and forced negotiations, they often fail to achieve their primary goal, regime change. Instead, they can unite the population behind their leaders, a phenomenon known as the rally around the flag effect. Iran's government has also found ways to circumvent sanctions, using smuggling shadow fleets for oil trade and alternative trade partners like China and Turkey. These evasions dilute the effectiveness of sanctions, as Iran can still find ways to keep its economy afloat. So what's the bottom line? Will the US and EU sanctions succeed in forcing Iran to change its behavior, or will they only harden Iran's resolve? The effectiveness of sanctions remains uncertain. But one thing is clear: They are reshaping Iran's economy and political landscape. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Yossi Cooper-Rosser. He's an intelligence and security expert, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper-Rosser, for joining us again.
Thank you.
Now looking at this, with the EU finally joining the US in designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization, we have effectively seen the end of European middle ground diplomacy. Is this unified 2026 front a genuine strategy to force Tehran to the table, or is it simply the last remaining symbolic move in a toolkit that is running out of options?
Well, I think first and foremost, the European move is a move of protesting against what happened in Iran in the last couple of weeks when so many Iranians were murdered by their own regime. That's the move that made the European take this decision and include the IRGC in their terror list. And it was not a move that was supposed to put more pressure on Iran as a country. Not that was the purpose. It was the only thing that was left in the toolkit of the Europeans in order to show that they are unhappy with what the Iranians are doing, what the Iranian regime is doing, and that something needs to be done, because you cannot just go on with business as usual when something like what the Iranian regime did happen. And whether it's going to put more pressure on Iran, yes, because if there were any deposits that belonging to the IRGC in European banks, then this is going to hurt them. But I don't think much of that was the case, anyhow, because of previous sanctions. And the snapback of the sanctions back in September, October made it clear that no Iranian would leave his money in European banks. So I don't think this is something that's going to have a factual impact on Iran. It's a symbolic move.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. Now, Tehran has retaliated by labeling Western armies as terrorist entities, creating a bizarre legal reality where both sides have now criminalized each other's state institution. In this environment of total legal paralysis, is there even a shred of gray zone left for back-channel diplomacy, or has the diplomatic bridge between them permanently burned?
No, it is not permanently burnt. The Iranians have their ways of reaching out to not only the Europeans, but definitely even the Americans, in order to deliver messages that show readiness to negotiate. We are familiar with the Turkish channel, and there are probably others that the Swiss are involved in that from time to time. And if the two sides want to reach an agreement, they will find a way to negotiate with each other. We don't have to worry about that. The question is whether the situation is going to convince the Iranians to go to conduct negotiations that would include receiving and accepting the conditions put forward by the United States. And there are two demands that the Americans have. One is that the Iranians will stop killing their own people, and that is a very difficult ask from the Iranians, because they don't have any other ways in order to deal with the unrest and the demand of the protesters to see a change in government. And the second demand is that the Iranians will give up the nuclear project and will stop demanding to be able to enrich uranium on their own soil. And this again is a very problematic ask from the Iranians by the Americans, because everybody understands that if they do that, the Iranians, this would mean a clear sign of weakness that might be interpreted by the people of Iran as an opportunity, especially if it is coincided with the commitment not to shoot at the public. They might see that as an opportunity to take action and remove the regime. And this is the problem that stands between having negotiations or not, and not the lack of channels.
Thank you for highlighting that. While the EU and US point to the September 2025 snapback as their legal bedrock, major powers like Russia and China have labeled the move a legal fiction with no binding force. If the world's rising economic powers refuse to recognize these mandates, isn't the West's attempt to enforce a global blockade actually a recipe for a fractured, de-dollarized international financial system?
No, first of all, the snapback was well based in the international law and well based in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the agreement of 2015, that according to which the Europeans were conducting their attitude towards an Iran nuclear project. According to this agreement, it was clear that if one of the participants to the plan is going to decide that it is moving away from the plan, all sanctions are going to be put back in place, including all the sanctions of the United Nations, and there's not going to be a possibility for a veto by the main powers in the Security Council. And that's exactly what happened. At a certain point, it was the last minute, as a matter of fact, the three European partners to this agreement decided to leave the agreement and to snap back the sanctions. And China and Russia, in spite of their opposition to this move, were not able to stop it using their status as permanent members of the Security Council. And they became legal as of then, and that's the case. Now, Russia and China, friends of Iran, friends of not friends of Iran, as a matter of fact, friends of the Iranian regime, have decided that they are not going to abide by this decision of the international community, in spite of the fact that they were part of this plan that envisaged this possibility in advance. This is the problem is with China and Russia, not with the EU. And that's a pity, because I believe that if they would have joined in putting the sanctions, the chances that the Iranian regime would give up this interest in continuing the nuclear project, the chances will be much higher. They can't continue without the help of Russia and China. But Russia and China instead just help the Iranians ignore the sanctions. And of course, since their capabilities are limited, it didn't help much the Iranians. And we see the impact of the snapback of the sanctions on the Iranian rial, that is diving into areas that no one ever thought it can reach. But this is the result of the legal sanctions put forward by the international community on behalf of the decision taken by the three European countries.
Right. And lastly, we are seeing a dual crush on the Iranian people. They are squeezed by the regime's internal corruption and the West's external sanctions. If the goal of the US and EU is to protect the Iranian people, how do they reconcile that with a 1.5 million rial exchange rate that punishes the middle class, lower class more than the elites? Does the West lose its moral authority when its policy results in the very humanitarian suffering it claims to oppose?
No, on the contrary, I think that everybody understands this is a crucial moment for the Iranian regime and for the Iranian people. Those who are not worrying about the fate and the well-being of the Iranian people are the Iranian regime. This is the player that is not caring at all about the well-being of the Iranian people. Not only that they are ready to let them suffer the economic sanctions, but they are ready also to kill them at point blank with their Basij and the IRGC forces. This is what we are watching. And the Iranian people is ready to go through the suffering, through the economic suffering, if this is going to rid it from the Iranian regime that treats him so badly. And yes, for bringing about a real change in Iran, the Iranian people has to go through suffering. This is not going to happen without any sacrifice. And they are ready to make the sacrifice. So you see that thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people were killed, murdered by the regime. And nevertheless, the people went out to the streets. So they understand that suffering, not only the economic suffering, but real sacrifice is necessary in order to bring about a change. And they really should be encouraged and praised for the courage they have shown so far. And I think what the Americans and the Europeans are expecting now to see is that due to the sanctions and due to the pressure put on the regime, the people will be more again ready to go to the streets and ask for their freedom. That's what needs to happen. And what the Americans are trying to do is to guarantee that the Iranian regime is not going to shoot at them.
With that, I'd like to thank Mr. Yossi Cooper-Rosser. Thank you very much for joining us on Deep Dive. That was all for this episode of the Deep Dive. Stay tuned to NewsX World for more news and updates.